what's up, good people? This is JJ here again, and this time it's a video called Which Guitar Amp is Right for You? I get asked this question a lot. A lot of people ask me this: which guitar amp should I get? And in order to answer that question, I'm going to divide it all up into 5 different tips. Step number 1 is determine your budget. I don't know how much money you're willing to spend on a guitar amplifier, but setting a budget is really important. So for instance, if you have 200 euros or $200 to spend, that can certainly narrow down your options, of course, which can be a good thing because there are a lot of different brands and a lot of different types of amplifiers and a lot of different models available. So I can understand if you're just starting out playing guitar, setting a budget is one of the most important things. There's another thing that I would like to stress in this video. I've learned through experience. I've owned lots and lots of different guitar amplifiers. Buying what you want is actually the better way to go than buying what you can afford. Sometimes it can be very rewarding to save a little longer, save more money to actually get what you really want to have. So your budget is largely going to determine your options. Step number 2 is you should take a look at the context in which you are going to use that guitar amplifier. This is probably the most important thing that you should figure out for yourself or the person you're going to buy that amplifier for. Are you simply going to use that amplifier to play at home, in your bedroom, or in the living room? Or would you like the amplifier to be used both at home and in a rehearsal space when you're going to play with a drummer, a bass player, another guitar player? That is largely going to determine what kind of amplifier you will need. Obviously, volume is a very big thing. When you're playing at home or in an apartment like mine, you don't want an amplifier that can simply do very loud sounds. You want an amplifier that sounds good at lower volumes. If you're going to play with a drummer in a rehearsal space, you want an amplifier that's not necessarily going to drown out that drummer, but you want to be heard in the middle of all of those other instruments, of course. For live use, I'm really not that worried about buying an amplifier that's loud enough for live use, because in 9 out of 10 situations nowadays, your amplifier is going to get mic'd up anyway. There's almost always going to be a sound guy who's going to just stick a microphone in front of the amplifier and make a mix for the front of house, and you will be able to hear yourself through the monitors on stage, or turn it up a little louder on stage so you will be able to hear yourself from the cabinet of your amplifier. A whole different story is when you're playing a live show in a pub where you're not being mic'd up. Then you will need an amplifier that is loud enough to compete with a drummer and a bass player and other guitar players. That's what I mean with context. If you're going to use it in the studio for recording, that's going to require a different set of features or properties. If you've set your budget and you know how you're going to use that amplifier, and more importantly, in what kind of situations are you going to use the amplifier, that and only then you're going to want to worry about the sound. So there are many different amplifier brands. Some very famous brands, of course, are Marshall, Vox, Fender, Mesa Boogie, you name it. There's all sorts of iconic guitar amplifiers that all have their unique sound. And when we're talking about guitar amplifier sounds, the different sounds and how these brands differ in sound quality, it is usually that we're talking about the distortion sound of that amplifier. If you're a complete noob, you have probably once in your life turned up a very small radio really loud. If you picture that, what's going to happen to the sound is it is going to distort, because it's going to produce a volume that the piece of equipment that we're talking about, whether it's a radio or like a very small amplifier, it is not meant to be turned up so loud, so the sound is going to distort. That is actually what we want from our guitar amplifiers. Only when they figured that a distorted guitar, the sound of rock guitar, sounded so good, they only found out about that in the age of tube amplifiers. So I'm talking about the 50s and the 60s of the previous century. When you turn up a tube preamplifier or a power amplifier, it's going to distort in a different way as a transistor radio would. or as a digital piece of audio equipment would distort. That's a very ugly sound. These tubes, these vacuum tubes, they distort in such a way it actually complements the guitar. It gives it more sustain, so it's going to sound longer. It gives it more harmonics, harmonic content. It's just a very musical sound. So when we're talking about British guitar amps and why people love them so much, we love Vox amplifiers because of their sound and because of the distortion the amplifier generates when it's driven really hard. That is the sound we're after when we're after a Vox sound. Think of Brian May in Queen, who had a Vox AC30 top boost. That guitar sound, the guitar solo from Bohemian Rhapsody, that's a Vox AC30 hit with a treble booster little device. When we're talking about a Marshall guitar sound, that's a little bit different. A Vox, they have like in the high mid-range, there's a bit of a hump there that sounds very characteristic. Marshalls sound different than a Vox. And then you have Fender amplifiers who are known for their clean sounds, and having very high headroom. That means you can push them to be very loud but not distort, like a Fender Twin Reverb or a Deluxe Reverb. But then a Fender Bassman, another type of amplifier from 1959, that particular amp model is known for its overdriven sound. Now, back in those days, you would actually have to turn up the volume on those amplifiers really loud in order to make them distort. Nowadays, fortunately, there are two volume knobs on most guitar amps. One is for the preamplifier, so the first part, that's where the guitar comes in, and one at the end, so you can actually drive that amplifier to give you that overdriven, that distorted sound, but still maintain a lower volume. Another reason why tube amps are very popular is because of the way they react to your playing. A vacuum tube is going to respond differently to the attack of your pick or your fingers or your guitar's tone and volume controls than a solid state or a transistor amp would. That is probably the main reason why people would advise you to get a tube amp. A downside to getting tube amplifiers is that they can be very loud, so maybe too loud for home use. If you want to learn more about different styles of amplifier sounds, different styles of distortion, I advise you to watch my video on that, which I will link at the end screen of this video. So it gives you, like American high gain, American clean, British crunch, British combo, all that kind of stuff. And you can kind of make up your mind as to which brand or which type of amplifier would be right for you. Okay, so we've already gotten a little bit into number 4, which is the type of amplifier. When I'm talking about type of amplifier, I'm talking about, should I get a tube amplifier? Should I get a solid state amplifier, a transistor amplifier? Or should I get one of those digital modeling amplifiers, which is a different breed, as I will tell you in a minute. You want a tube amplifier if you need sheer volume, natural distortion that is going to respond well to your playing dynamics and how you operate your guitar's tone and volume controls and the pickups that you're using. But you don't want a tube amplifier if you're just playing at home. You might want to get a small one, like a 1 watt tube amplifier, or maybe a 5 watt amplifier, but nothing too big because it's easily going to be too loud for home use. Fortunately, many tube amplifiers do have kind of like an attenuator to drop the power from 5 watts to 1 watt, or from 30 watts to 15 watts or something like that. Solid state amplifiers, like I used to use in the 90s, PV Bandit, they are known to not have the greatest overdriven, distorted tone in the world, although they're getting better these days. A big advantage of a solid state amplifier is, one, you can drive them or you can turn them up pretty loud and they will not distort. So it's going to be a good clean slate, a good clean platform, and you can get your distortion sounds from using different overdrive and distortion pedals on the floor. So they can be loud and clean, and they're very reliable. They require no tube maintenance. Another big advantage of a solid state amplifier is the weight. Tube amplifiers can be very, very heavy. A Vox AC15 weighs around 25 kilograms. If you're going to use pedals for your distorted sounds, you could go for a solid state amplifier. Unless you are using the pedal to boost or drive the front end of that solid state amplifier. That is not going to sound pretty. A little bit of guitar amp physics here. If you consider a guitar amplifier as being three parts, that would be a front end, so a preamplifier. That's where the guitar hits the amplifier, and that is where most of the distortion is created. Then you have the power stage or the power amp. That is where the signal gets amplified before going to the third part, which is the speaker. If you have a tube front end, that allows to be overdriven in a beautiful way. So if you use a pedal or a device to push the volume going into the amplifier, it's going to distort more in a musical way. If you do that to a transistor or a solid state amplifier, it's not going to sound pretty, because you're actually pushing a transistor or a digital front end. You're pushing that into digital distortion, which is something you don't want. Same holds good for the power amp. Tube amps, when they're turned up very, very loud, you also get some what is called power amp distortion. It's going to compress the sound in a way that's very gratifying to play, but you can only achieve that at very loud volumes. In most live situations that I come across, I can never drive a tube amp so loud that I'm going to get power amp distortion, or the sound guy will start yelling at me to turn down because he cannot mic the amplifier properly. The occasions where you can actually generate some power amp distortion in a live situations are rare these days. So if you're going to push the front end of your amplifier, make sure it's a tube front end. But for most situations, I'm guessing if your budget is limited, you could go for a transistor amplifier, for a solid state amplifier, and get a couple of pedals on the floor to give you nice distortion sounds and the volume and the reduced weight that a solid state amp can give you. A third breed of guitar amplifiers is what people call modeling amplifiers. These are digital amplifiers that kind of emulate the tube front end of a tube amplifier, but they have a digital power stage. These kinds of amplifiers also have the benefit of giving you different types of amplifiers, air quote, built in. So with most modeling amplifiers, you can actually go for a Fender clean kind of sound. With the twist of a knob, you can go to a Brit combo, which is usually something like a Vox amplifier, Marshall, Mesa Boogie. So you can get all sorts of different guitar amp tones, traditional guitar amp tones, plus built-in effects at a very reasonable price with ample volume and reduced weight. So if you're just starting out, or if you're not really sure what kind of amplifier suits your needs or what kind of sound works for you in the music that you want to make, best thing would be to get a very affordable modeling amplifier that is loud enough to play in a band if you want, so you can explore your needs and get a proper tube amp later on in your career or in a few years' time. There's one thing, well, there's a number of things I haven't talked about, but this video is supposed to be understandable and easy if you're a complete noob, and that is speakers. When we're talking about guitar amplifiers, I'm referring to combo amplifiers. A combo amplifier is an amplifier that has the amp plus the speaker built into one box. You can also go for the piggyback approach, which is a separate guitar amplifier, preamp and power amp, but get a different cabinet or a cab with a built-in speaker. Convenience of that is when you're playing in a band, a lot of venues have their own speaker cabinets that you can hook up your amp to, and they're used to miking those specific cabinets, or those cabinets were chosen to match the room. It's also going to save a lot of space in a car when you're traveling to a gig and you're just bringing the head instead of the whole combo. That can be a godsend. In those kinds of situations, a head and a cab, the piggyback approach, can be very convenient. Another thing is when you're going, and this holds good for tube amps only, you're going to want to look at what kind of tubes are in the power section. There's different types of vacuum tubes: EL84s, EL34s, 6L6, 6V6, and they all have a different kind of power amp sound. Hybrid amplifiers, there are amplifiers that have a tube preamp and a digital or a solid state power amp, they can work very well too, because you can hit them with boost pedals, drive pedals, and still get musical distortion when you're pushing the front end, but you have reduced weight and ample power from a digital power stage. A good example of that, the new Vox MV50 amps. Those are mini heads that have kind of a new type of vacuum tube, which is called, I think they call it the new tube in the front end, but it has a Class D power amp that you see in a lot of bass amplifiers. So it can get you really loud volume, but still get the typical Vox crunch from that new tube in the front end. You have to determine what type of amplifier is right for you. If you're going to play in a band, you could use a solid state amplifier or a high powered modeling amplifier if you're still looking for what kind of sound you like. If you already know that and you want to invest in a proper tube amplifier, you have to decide whether you want a combo or a head and a cab. Speakers. The third part in amplifier physics is the actual speaker. Mind you that a guitar speaker ideally has a lot of roll-off in the high end of the sound, because when a guitar speaker doesn't have that treble roll-off, it's going to sound really ice-picky and not very pleasant to the ears. Also, speakers, they tend to wear in over time, so when you play them a lot at higher volumes, they become more mellow. So you cannot compare hi-fi speakers to guitar amp speakers. I would typically recommend getting at least a 12-inch speaker for band use. Only then it's going to have enough low end. Although there are examples of guitar amps with a 10-inch speaker like a Fender Princeton that can cut through very well in a band situation. If you're going to play at home and go for the digital or hybrid or modeling route, you don't really have to worry that much about speakers if you're only going to play it at home. Great example of that is the Yamaha THR series, THR5 and THR10. They are kind of a mix between Yamaha's hi-fi series of products and guitar amplifiers. So they have a really great virtual tube amplifier coming through to, I don't know what, 3-4 inch speakers or something, but they sound really good at lower volumes, and they respond very much like a tube amplifier would. Let's talk about features for a little bit, which is the fifth step. And the first feature I would consider be the wattage, so the power amp rating. Don't think that a 5-watt tube amplifier is not loud. It is crazy loud. The wattage doesn't really say very much about the volume. A 7-watt tube amplifier like the Fender Bassbreaker 007 is only 7 watts, but it's 7 crazy loud tube watts. So it will cut through in the band just perfectly with a single 12-inch speaker. It does say a lot about, especially with tube amps, the wattage, it does say a lot about the clean headroom. That's something you hear and read about a lot, which is a simple concept of how long will it take for that tube amplifier to start distorting. If you need a squeaky clean sound at a very high volume, you're going to want to have a tube amplifier of 40, 50 watts, maybe even 100 watts. If you need an overdriven, a distorted sound, you don't really want a tube amp that is louder than, I don't know, 20 watts, because then it's going to take very long volume-wise for it to distort properly. That is why I love the Bassbreaker 007 so much. It starts to distort, at 2. And if I want a clean sound, because it's a tube amplifier, I just roll back on the guitar's volume to find that clean sound, roll it up for a nice crunchy rhythm sound, and roll it all the way up on the guitar I'm talking about for a very distorted sound. That may not be your cup of joe, but it works for me. That is why this video is called choosing the right guitar amp for you. If you need that clean headroom, you're going to want to have a tube amplifier that's 20-30 watts, maybe even more. A good way to go for a tube amplifier that's loud but it still has a good clean sound is the Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, which you come across in a lot of venues too. If you just need the clean sound and the volume, I would not recommend going for a tube amplifier because they're crazy heavy, they're crazy expensive, and if all you're going to use is just the clean sound, you'd best go for a solid state amplifier. A lot of pros probably don't use modeling amplifiers or hybrid amplifiers because they have already made up their mind as to what kind of guitar sound, what kind of distortion properties they want to hear from their amplifiers. So they're not really learning and discovering effects and sound combinations. They know what they want and then they choose accordingly. Of course, their budgets are probably a little bigger than when you're starting out too. That's a lot of food for thought. This last caption was called features. What about recording features? I'm not a big fan of tube amplifiers that have a direct out. That means you can simply plug in a microphone cable and go to a mixing console or go into an audio interface or your computer to record, because you are not capturing the sound of the guitar amp as a big physical thing that is producing sound. You're going to want to mic the speaker for that. There are some exceptions. There are some tube amps that have really good emulated outputs, such as the PV Classic 20 head has a really good USB recording out. It can be very convenient, but the sound that an amplifier is generating in a particular room, that's what you want to capture if you want to make pro recordings. Effects loops, well, yes, some effects like reverbs and delays, they sound better after the distortion of the front of the amplifier. So in the effects loop, which comes between the preamp and the power amp. But a delay and a reverb can also sound pretty fine going into the front end of the amplifier, depending on what kind of sound you want. If you want a more processed sound, I would look for an amplifier with an effects loop so you can hook up pedals. Different channels, that's all got to do with the kind of sound you're after. If you need a clean sound and a lead sound, you want a dual channel amplifier. If you have a single channel tube amplifier, you can just get your clean sound by rolling back on the guitar volume. But if you need lots of different sounds from one amplifier, you'd want to go for a multi-channel amplifier and some foot switches. Of course, you could also do that with pedals, but you're not going to buy like a €2,000 tube head to use pedals in front of it. You want it to do all of the sounds, I reckon. I would like to finish this video off by just recommending a couple of good amplifiers in different segments of the market. As I said, I really like the Fender Bassbreaker 007. 7-watt all-tube combo or head that has plenty of volume to play in a band if you're going to be mic'd up in a live situation. But it doesn't have a lot of clean headroom, but it is very affordable, it looks cool, and a very reliable amplifier. Another really good and moderately priced tube amplifier is the Vox AC4. They come in different shapes and sizes. You have the AC4 TV. A demo of that is also on my channel. I like the Fender Blues Junior. Demo of that is also on my channel. Different than the Vox, different kind of distortion, but it might really be your thing. Probably a little bit too loud for apartment use. Fender Hot Rod Deluxe, terribly loud, too loud for home use, but a great amplifier to use in a band, either on its own or with pedals in front of it. The Vox AC15, that's been my main amplifier for years and years and years. It's got reverb, tremolo, 12-inch speaker, and 15 very, very loud tube watts. Marshall DSL 40C, which is a 40-watt tube combo, dual channel, and each channel has a different voice switch. So if you're looking for different kinds of sounds from the amplifier, different distorted sounds, that might be the way to go. In the solid state department, I particularly like the Boss Katana 50 or 100 watt amplifiers. Very affordable, 200, 300, $400. Built-in effects, different amp models, really great sound quality. And if you're just going to use it for home use or living room use, you could probably best buy a Yamaha THR5 or THR10, which is the hi-fi kind of guitar amp that I was talking about earlier. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will get back to you. Hope this has been useful for you, and keep rocking. Happy hunting.